Okay, so when would you like me to get started? Do we want to wait a few more minutes? Okay, I see somebody say in the chat it would be nice to start, so I just want to confirm that that will work for everybody. For okay, can the translator just give me a yes that we're going to start? Awesome. Okay. So, welcome to day number 3, I think. Um, I am, yeah, looking forward to diving into a case that is very familiar to me, a family that I've worked with for many, many years in different configurations. And I think it will be a good, way to sort of illustrate the different, ideas of structural family therapy, the different ways to make an assessment, to use the idea of mapping, um, and ways to intervene and make structural changes. So before I dive into that, and it's going to be primarily lecture style, where I will describe in great detail aspects of the case and my work with them. Um, Before we dive into that, I want to look at some of the questions that were sent and spend a little time on that. So let me make sure I can pull that up. Here we go. Okay. Um, there are a number of very good questions here with a um and I might uh push some of the responses or answers to some of the questions to the uh to see if they're answered in my lecture. But I will get to some of them right now. Um, so the number one, how can we distinguish in practice between when the problem lies with the child and when it lies within the family system? Um, and so a child might have a quote unquote problem that has some sort of neurodevelopmental origin or a biological origin that isn't just something that comes out in the context of family relationships. So it's important to identify if there is a real issue, whether it's a cognitive issue, a learning disability, for instance. Is it something really like autism spectrum or something like that? It's important to identify that that is real and what is the context in which those symptoms get aggravated or amplified or exacerbated by um, the relationships within the family. So I don't think of it as separate. Uh, the problem is always sort of both. Inside a person in part, but also between people. Um, I hope as this course goes on that uh, idea that a problem is multifaceted, that it's always partly inside a person, but then partly within the context. I hope that stands out. Question number two, I wonder how this knowledge has influenced your perception of yourself and your role within the family. I love this one. Does working with clients affect your own dynamics within the family? Yes, it has made me, um, I mean, I think when I was a family therapist before I was, yeah, because I started doing family therapy before I was married and before I became a father. And I would say that now that I am both married and a father, um, that has really changed how I do therapy. And I have much more of a um, appreciation for the difficulties that parents can face. I think before I had kids, I would sometimes join more easily with children in the families and had a harder time connecting with the parents. But now that I am a parent and um, uh, it's easier for me to connect with some of the basic anxieties and fears and worries that come with being a parent. Um, and one thing I would say is that I try to be honest in my work, meaning I don't tell people about my family or about my personal life. But if I am um, unable to do something with my own family or parent in a certain way, I am not going to ask the parents that I'm providing therapy to ask them or tell them to do something that I am not willing to do myself as a parent. Um, so in that way, my work and my personal life are quite aligned. Um, yeah, and I can do that without, I think I do, clients do know that I am a parent. And a lot of them ask that. Sometimes they ask that before they even agree to start working with me. And I find it's helpful to just say that from the jump. Um, okay, question number three. If we use reframing and questions to break the cycle of a symptom, then through these questions, a family member may experience emotions such as shame or guilt for failing to cope with the anxiety or for not speaking assertively with the child and feels guilty. How are these emotions integrated and processed? Does this happen in joint sessions, or is it still recommended to meet individually with family members as well? Great question. So it's important when we provide a reframing um, of a symptom that it connects with what the client is telling us. So it can't be um, something that is very divergent from their own experience. It has to connect to what their experience is, but broaden the perspective. Um, so, for instance, reframing, and I'll go into this in the case that I described, but reframing like anger as worry or concern. Um, and so you don't deny that there's anger and real emotion there, but you try to expand the meaning of the anger because some people take anger and just feel like that is they're being blamed or shamed. But if you can tell a teenager that, hey, your parent is screaming or yelling or acting angrily because they are terrified about your safety, that is a way to expand the perspective without shaming or blaming, ideally. Um, and sometimes a youth or a parent in particular might get overwhelmed with feelings of guilt or shame. And that it sometimes is appropriate to have one-off sessions with them in order to process some of these feelings. And depending on how the parent shows up in the session, if they're uncontained, if they're emotional, if their emotions are just kind of all over the place, then it's helpful to meet with them individually to work with them on how can they get more support for those feelings of guilt and shame and overwhelm, etc. So that doesn't bleed into them not being able to hear their kid. Um, okay, question number 4. What is the correct way to proceed if clients start behaving aggressively or shouting during a session? How can they be calmed down? Um, yeah, very good question. I have had to stand up out of my chair and um, say stop. I've had to hold my hands up. I've had to do this kind of like a timeout, sports analogy for some people that works. Um, Sometimes I will get up and turn around if nobody is responding to my trying to intervene and stop. Um, if it escalates to a point where there becomes where I sense that there might be physical interaction or conflict, um, I will stop the session and make sure that safety is our priority, and I have a clear boundary around having violence cannot happen in a session. And I tell people that before the violence erupts. So I tell people that in the beginning of my work with them when we sort of talk about basic expectations. Um, and what I find is that I haven't had to do this very much. People definitely yell and they get animated. Um, but I feel that if I'm able to connect with the feeling of hurt or shame or pain that's underneath the aggressive expression of behavior, then I'm able to help them be in a place where they can kind of calm down. Um, let's see. Question number 5. How should one work with families where parents have war-related trauma? For example, a father with PTSD symptoms and a mother with high levels of anxiety, possibly suffering from depression. The parents often experience conflicts, misunderstandings. Children in such families withdraw into themselves and distance themselves from everybody. They stop studying, they lose joy in life. Is it possible to help such families? If so, what methods can be used? Yes, thank you so much for this question. And goodness, it must be a pretty common thing that you all are exposed to in various ways. There's a lot of work, and actually one of my mentors worked in the Veterans Affair Administration in here in where I live in California in the United States, and um, I've done a lot of work with the veterans after they come home from a war and they're done with their military service and they come home. How do they re-enter into civilian life, into family life, and ways to prep both them and their families? So a lot of it is psychoeducation. Um, to sort of prep for the various difficulties and the things that might come up for the soldiers when they return to their family. How might their families have accommodated and changed over time? They might feel as if they don't feel understood. It's very hard when you are in combat and in war to then come in civilian life, and you might not feel as if people can understand at all your experience. So you might feel very lonely or disconnected. Um, and so we focus on um, really sort of helping families try to um, anticipate what problems might emerge in that process. Now, I this is a more in-depth topic, and I think it might be relevant to have a segment of one of our future sessions talk more specifically about this. Because I think it's and certainly an important topic. Um, and I don't think I can give it full uh, what it really deserves right now. So, and I can also share a link. I don't know if there's a book that my mentor and colleague wrote. I have no idea if there's any translations other than English, but I can share bits of that book as well. Okay. Um, so let's see here. Let me just do a time check and okay, let me get back to there we go. Okay. Um, I've heard this professional psychological opinion. Two-thirds of family conflicts cannot be resolved. I understand there's a grain of truth to this because everyone has their own worldview. What do you think about this? I don't know. I haven't. To me, there are when I think of family conflicts, and uh, uh, this kind of connects to the next question which is, will we have a lecture on how to work with romantic relationships in a couple? And yes, I will do a portion of that in one of our later sessions. Uh, Long-term couples or relationships, even the best marriages, have certain conflicts that come up over and over and over again. Uh, People that have been married for 20, 30, 40 years somehow end up fighting and getting annoyed at each other about the same thing. Um, and to me, that's sort of an indication of, okay, these are ways that we are interacting around certain basic uh, fears or anxieties that get triggered in the context of a relationship. Um, and so to me, it's not necessarily about quote unquote resolving conflicts, but can we come to a better understanding such that the conflict doesn't get in the way of us still feeling connected and being able to um, uh, have a relationship that feels satisfying. Um, yeah, so I don't and quite honestly, I don't um, when there are these big psychological studies that say these sort of numbers that such and such and such number of people don't get better, this or that. I don't tend to put a lot of weight on things like that. Um, so I do want to go into couples relationships because I think that that is a key part of this work. Um, so I will touch on it very briefly today, but I'll have a segment later on in the coming weeks, more detail on that. Um, and question number 8, is it appropriate to tell a client what specific pattern is characteristic of their family? I told a client that one partner was a pursuer, another was an avoider, and for the rest of the session, the client kept justifying herself, saying she wasn't pursuing anybody, but simply caring and seeking attention, and that no one understood her good intentions. I like this question because when we provide a interpretation or a reframe or say, like, this is what we are observing, um, I think the real craft of therapy is providing those interpretations or statements in such a way where they're, it causes the clients to expand their thinking a little bit or to be a little bit confused or wonder about it. Um, and but not to go into complete just defensiveness and denial. And that is kind of the artistry of therapy. And sometimes as therapists, we will say things that clients feel like it's not a fit, like that doesn't feel right when you are saying that I appear as if I'm pursuing. Um, and then the response is, okay, help me understand. So that is curious. What did I miss? Um, and in that process, to get to a better understanding of how the client might describe their way of seeking attention. And then maybe you say, instead of pursuer, you say, yeah, you are um, a caring, loving partner who is looking for connection and attention. And you don't have to call it pursuer. Um, okay, question number 9. How do you make an intervention or offer an interpretation without it coming across as an accusation? For example, when you need to convey a certain idea to parents or highlight the impact their words or actions have on their child's behavior. Yeah. Um, so this is really important. A when you notice that a parent is being let's say, just frankly mean to their kid, um, how do you intervene in such a way where you help the parent understand that they're having an impact on their kid? Um, so one way to do this would be to, once you have identified like what the parent hopes that they want to see different from their kid, maybe they want their kid to listen more, for example. Um, and then you see this interaction where the parent says something that is not super nice to the kid, and you see the kid's physical reaction. They turn away or they look down. Uh, and you might ask the parent, that's really interesting. I see that your son uh, just put his head down and looked at the floor. I'm curious what's happening to him right now. Do you know what made him do that? Can we find out? Um, as I know how important it is that he listened to you, but something weird just happened. And clearly when he's looking away, I think it's hard for him to listen. Can we find out what you might have done inadvertently that helped him not listen? Um, you might turn, that's one alternative. Another alternative is to turn to the kid and say, what just happened? I noticed you looked down. Was there something that your parents said or did that made you do that? Um, and then helping the parents not get defensive, but hear their kid um, share directly and clearly how they experienced what their parents said or did. Um, these questions really get at the heart of the in the moment experiential work with the family of helping them find new patterns and ways to talk to each other, while helping them also become more aware of the patterns and ways that the ineffective patterns and ways that they are currently talking to each other. So you have to have them. A supervisor of mine once said, you want them to back into the problem. So instead of telling them what the problem is, you want to have them experience it and then say, yes, when I said that, my son turned away, and that's not what I want. I want him to actually look at me. Okay, how do we think we can make that happen? Um, let's see. I am gonna The next question is about individual traits and systemic patterns. I'm going to go into my case presentation because that is going to, I think, address this next question. Um, and then also, when it comes to um, question number 11 and working with an individual client. And if you can't get other members of the family in, how do you apply some of these principles? That's another very good question. And I want to dedicate a segment of a future lecture to how to work with individuals from a systemic lens. Um, Okay, and then the rest of the questions, there's something about how to create this map. Um, and I am hoping that my lecture today will address that. Um, yes. Uh, okay. Alrighty. And then the last question has signed, it's about couples. And so I will push that until the segment that I do focused on couples. Alrighty. So let me close that window, open up my notes here. Okay. And alrighty. Okay. Um, so in this case, my hope was that it will illustrate how to assess and intervene with a highly symptomatic family where there's suicidality, substance abuse, hoarding, issues of parental control and power, um, issues around identity, gender, and sexuality. Um, uh, this is a family of four. There are two parents and two children. At the time that I started working with them, the children were young adolescents, ages roughly 13 and 15 at the time of the referral. Um, the presenting problem was the eldest child, the 15-year-old, had two very dangerous and serious gestures at suicide. At one point, this youth climbed to the roof of their school and threatened to jump off. There was also an incident where uh, the youth threatened to jump out of the family's second story apartment out of the window, and this was like a good 20 to 30 foot uh, uh, drop. And that incident also led to the police being called and involved. I began working with the family after the youth was released from the hospital. So here in the States, if there's a serious suicide attempt or threat, and the police and hospitals get involved, then there's a involuntary hold, um, which can last, uh, I think, at least up to 72 hours, sometimes longer. And then in this case, the youth was in the hospital for a number of days and then went into a intensive outpatient therapy program. And so that was every day going to therapy for individual group therapy for I think like 5, 6 hours a day, about 5 days during the week. Um, at the time of the referral to me for family therapy, this teen had finished the intensive outpatient and had started working with an individual therapist that was working in the same agency that I was working at. Um, and that individual therapist was seeing this youth, I think at least twice a week. And at that point, there were no other providers that were involved. Um, so the identified patient was the older youth who had made these suicide attempts. Um, and that was essentially all I knew when I got this referral. So in my first session, my focus was really upon engagement, getting to know each family member, um, and what they're and what when I start like in the very first meeting, um, it's important to not wait too long to get into the reasons why a family has come to your office, and the reasons for the referral. But that's not the first thing that you say when they come in the door. The first thing that you say is you introduce yourself and you have them introduce themselves, and you want to get to know something interesting about each one of them. What are their interests, their hobbies? Um, what are they like doing? What are they like doing together? What are they as a family? What are they like doing individually? Um, I also um, pay attention to um, how family members, and if family members, if kids, for instance, don't want to talk, I respect that at the very beginning. I say, I am very glad that you're here, and I appreciate that, and I know that you will take in a lot that we are talking about, and I welcome your voice and value your opinion. So whenever you want to share that, I really look forward to that. But I don't force people to talk. Um, so, like I said, I want to learn about their perspectives on what brings them to therapy. For the children, I ask, but don't force this, but I say, what is your understanding of your family coming together to meet with the therapist as a family? What did your parents tell you about coming here today? Um, and sometimes a youth will respond with, I don't know, or my parent didn't tell me anything, or they won't, or they just won't say anything. And then I will turn to the parent and I say, well, it could be helpful right now to share your thoughts with your child around, yeah, what brings you here, what you would like to get out of coming here. Um, so with this particular family, um, when they walked in the door, I was aware of how and where they sat in my office. My office had at that time a small couch and then two decent sized individual chairs. Um, and usually, a family of four, there'll be two people on the couch and then one in each of the chairs on the side of the couch. But this family was interesting because three of the family members squeezed together on this couch, and that was the um, father and the kids squeezed together on the couch, and the mother sat in a chair next to the couch. Um, so I took mental note of this arrangement. Dads and kids close, is mother disconnected? There was something about the closeness and the squeezing together on this couch that stood out to me. So part of my initial assessment, now I don't say anything. These are things, observations that I am filing away in my mind as potential um, data points for my assessment. Um, now, um, so I filed this away and I was thinking, okay, this might be something. How do I confirm this? Um, so the next thing I looked for was sort of the body language and appearance. Mom appeared to be She was sitting in a chair by herself, and she definitely seemed to be on the periphery. She seemed to sink into her chair, and she looked very small. She was fidgety, and there was a kind of nervousness that was palpable. And there was just the visual that I had of her kind of almost swallowed up by this chair. And then dad sitting comfortably on this couch, but with these two kids, young teens, squeezed next to him. That just gave me this feeling of, is this a intergenerational coalition at work that I am seeing? Where you have a coalition between father and youth against the mom. Um, the youngest child, sitting on the couch, also appeared nervous, um, looked down. When spoken to, would make eye contact, but would stare at me without blinking. Um, and there was something really intense and almost like we say a deer caught in headlights, um, is a way to describe somebody who is in a state of fear. So she would just sort of like um, sit there very rigidly and stare at me without blinking. Um, and I also took note of that. That was interesting. I was wondering what that meant. Um, the oldest child was wearing baggy, gender-neutral clothing. Um, this youth made better eye contact, and even though they were sullen and sad, um, there was something about the eye contact they made with me and the way that they interacted during the social stage of asking about what their interests were, that felt more reciprocal, more relational. Um, so I took note of that. There was something that felt disconnected about mom and about the youngest kid, something a little more relational about the identified patient. And then dad was interesting in that he was quite formal and polite, made good eye contact, and was well spoken. Um, and I also noticed that the family looked at him when answering questions or would look to him first sometimes, almost as if to ask for permission. So I'm getting this picture here of some separation or disconnection in the family. One parent who seems to be uh, in the hierarchy or um, the position of highest authority in the family. Um, and and then I couldn't tell at times it almost looked like instead of there being two parents, it looked like there was one parent and three children. The mom at times looked very young to me. Um, This family was middle class, but they had financial difficulties. They lived in a very expensive area. Father had a job outside of the home as a teacher at a local university. Mom did not work. This family was very intelligent and interesting. Um, they had playful banter between them when talking about um, different subjects like literature and they were very into uh, there's something called like a maker community. I'm not sure, working with kind of like engineering, design, working with computer coding, things like that. So a very intellectual family. Um, Dad, in addition to being the breadwinner, the person earning the money, he was also responsible and took care of all of the cooking and shopping responsibilities, and also helping the kids with their homework. So, in an interesting way, it almost appeared as if he did everything, like every parental role he occupied, which was unique. Oftentimes, I see a parent, a father maybe, who is working outside of the home, and then the mother or the other parent figure is doing a lot of the, or responsible for a lot of the things that happen within the home. But this was a unique setup where the father was just super involved in all aspects. But there was a almost a maybe controlling flavor to the way that he uh, interacted with other family members. Now, um, when I think of when we do an assessment and we think of, okay, looking at dad, he seems controlling. You want to understand what are the behaviors that other family members, particularly the other parent figure, are doing or not doing that are supporting that controlling behavior of dad. So he is not doing that in isolation. He's not doing that in a vacuum. He's doing that in response to something. And over time, what I observed was that he overfunctioned in relation to mom's underfunctioning. Um, and mom underfunctioned in relation to dad's overfunctioning. So they worked in, it fit their, the ways that they interacted. Um, it was a inflexible and rigid arrangement where he was the functional one, she was the not very functional one. Okay. Uh, so let's see, where am I? After the initial social stage, which is basically getting to know the person, their likes, hobbies, interests, etc. Um, I opened it up to ask the family members what brought them to therapy and the things that they would like to change. Immediately and with lots of emotion, the oldest, and remember, the oldest youth is the one who had the suicide attempts. Um, this youth expressed anger and frustration and pointed to the mom and explained how hard it was to live with somebody who hoards. Now, hoarding is, um, she would go to thrift stores, used stores in the place where, in the surrounding area where they lived, and would collect different knickknacks, objects, and bring them home. And it created an atmosphere in the home where there was just too many things, and it made it, number one, it made it hard to even move around in certain parts of the home. And there was also for the children a feeling of shame that they would not bring friends over to the home because of this hoarding situation that they were embarrassed about. Um, so what's really interesting is I knew nothing when I heard this intake. Nobody told me anything about hoarding. They only told me about, okay, this is a kid that in a family. This is a kid that was recently hospitalized for these suicide attempts. And there's conflict in the family. And that was basically all that I knew going into this session. So it was really interesting and almost it threw me off just a little bit to hear about this hoarding. Like, whoa, that's kind of a big deal. Um, so what was interesting is that the oldest youth opened up and shared their frustration about mom's hoarding. And then immediately the younger sibling started joining with the older sibling and complaining as well about mom's hoarding. And it was noteworthy that the dad also joined the youth in complaints about mom's hoarding. And so all of a sudden, I see three people of this family constellation of four on this couch sitting together, kind of berating mom, who is sitting in this chair getting smaller and smaller as her family is essentially attacking her. Um, so in this moment, the mood shifted quickly, and I had to think quickly and to make a decision around how to intervene in a way that I could get, number one, get the family to stop piling on mom and demonstrate that I could hear and understand their frustration with mom, but do that in a way without joining what was apparently an intergenerational coalition. So it felt a little bit like a high wire act where I was sensitive to um, wanting to connect to mom's feeling isolated and ostracized by her family, and at the same time, not minimize the family's concerns about the hoarding behavior. Um, so I initially felt myself wanting to kind of check out and pull away from this conflict because something about it felt dangerous, actually. And I say dangerous not in the like I was at risk physically or even psychologically, but there was something icky, essentially, and just about the sort of psychic reality that I was experiencing in the room. And it produced in me a feeling of wanting to run away. So I had to notice this in myself and notice almost how I was scooching back in my chair. And then I had to do the opposite of that because had I run away, running away is what this family does in different they escalate conflict and then they run away from each other instead of dealing directly and effectively with really serious issues. So by my doing the opposite, I leaned in and I said to them, thank you. I really appreciate what you all are sharing. And I know it's very difficult, but the fact that you are sharing these really difficult, hard feelings, um, I know it's hard, but it actually really is encouraging to me because you guys are showing your family's passion and love. So I know there's a lot of passion here and love and hurt. That is all clear, but that's all together in the soup. Um, so by doing that, I'm communicating that by leaning in, that I accept their feelings, that I accept and I'm not afraid of their feelings, um, which ultimately will become a theme in this work, um, around the family's difficulty, particularly the parents' difficulty in tolerating strong expression of emotion from their kids. Um, so I turn to the mom and I say, it must be really hard to hear the anger from your family directed at you. Really, really hard. I can see that. She nods, and she starts crying. Um, and I say to her softly, I think, but softly, but so that the other family members can still hear. Um, I say, I think that underneath their anger is real worry about you, actually. And it might sound strange, but when they are saying things that sound mean and they seem angry and being hurtful towards you, I think it's their way of expressing that they're worried. Um, and then I turn to the father and the youth and I say, I think unfortunately that your mom, and I look at the kids and then I look at dad and I say, your wife only hears your anger. And she doesn't hear how worried you guys are about her. Um, so in this moment, the oldest child, who I already had a little bit of a sense had some emotional maturity and there was a reciprocal interaction between us, um, connects to this idea that I laid out about them possibly being worried about her, about mom. And the oldest child, in connecting to this idea, visibly begins to soften a bit. Um, and as she's softening, as the youth is softening, and I see some sadness, I say, is it fair to say that you have a lot of worry about your mom? The kid says yes. Um, and I say, what do you worry about? And the kid says, uh, she's sad all the time. I don't think she's happy. And when the youth says this, mom turns to the youth, tears are in her eyes, and she says, thank you. And then she reaches her hand out uh, to her daughter, and they hold hands. Um, so I'm wondering, this is really interesting. Like, what is the structure here? Here I thought there was this coalition, the three against the one. Um, but now I see this interesting connection between mom and the oldest youth. What is this about? Um, so this becomes the first of many moments when in my work with the family, when I observe the oldest youth break out of this coalition with the father and the younger sibling to come to mother's rescue. Um, so this is really kind of more of a, I guess what we call a shifting intergenerational coalition. Shifting meaning members go back and forth between the two sides, but the coalition is still parent, the parents are separated or on two sides of the coalition. Um, and in addition to that kind of the coalitions within the family, the other structural component that is important to focus on is the fact that the executive subsystem, which is the parental system, um, only has one member in it, which is the dad. And mom doesn't fit into that structure. And there are things that dad does that inhibit mom from joining him, and there are things that mom does that get in the way of dad being more inviting for her to join him. So that's another key component where I want to disrupt that organization. Um, so, um, but these are all thoughts that I'm having as I'm observing what the family is doing. Then the question is how do I bring my thoughts, my observations into the room in a way where I am helping the family to develop a different awareness of what is happening and an expansion of their perception of the problem. Because when they say something like, the problem is mom's hoarding, they're basically saying the problem is inside mom. Um, and so our job as therapists is to then make that statement, expand it into something relational. Um, and then the same thing with the suicidality of the child. Um, Parents described, uh, if a kid or a youth did what they did, um, then they are depressed or they are overwhelmed or and all of those things might be true. But what is the suicide? What is the suicidality a communication of, and what is where does it fit within the pattern of interaction? So I also had to make a choice here around which symptom I focused on. Um, so instead of focusing on the hoarding, which was the first thing that the family identified, I acknowledged that that was an issue. Um, but I didn't want to leave this whole thing of suicidality off to the side. I wanted um, to get back to it. Um, so, uh, in so I had to tell the family that I wanted to better understand um, uh, what happens between them when difficult things arise. Um, so I kind of shifted from the hoarding and I said, so I want to know my understanding is that here are these incidents that happened that led to the youth being hospitalized. Um, and I wanted to talk to the whole family together about what had happened. And for some therapists, this can feel um, awkward or even inappropriate because it's like, why would you talk about one child's suicidality in front of the other child? Well, that other child was at home when the police came. Um, in response to and was there when their sibling made the threat. So there's nothing that this family isn't already like they know about all this stuff and they're experiencing it. And so sometimes unwittingly, we as therapists, in our discomfort around talking about um, really difficult, dangerous things, we sometimes say, well, that's a private thing for this kid, and let's talk to just the kid by ourselves, even without the other family members. And I've seen this happen. Uh, and I think that that's a huge mistake. Um, because as I will describe later, um, the suicidal behavior is part of um, and connected to family interactions. Now, it doesn't mean that this kid doesn't suffer from depression or have some mental health concerns. Yes, they do. But it's still connected and a part of these larger family systemic interactions. Um, so, um, sometimes these conversations are hard to get to because the youth who was the one who made an attempt or a threat of suicide doesn't want to talk about it, or they refuse to talk about it in front of their family members. Um, that's a separate issue that is important to address. For all the issues that I had with this family, this was not one of the issues that I had to confront, fortunately. Um, so when I asked the family to tell me more about what happened before, during, and after the event, and that's key. You want to understand not just the um, part about the hospitalization, but like what were the sequence of events and interactions that preceded the hospitalization? What happened during that time, like when the police came, et cetera? Who called the police? Why did they call the police? Um, what happened right after the police came to the house? what was each person thinking and feeling? Um, I don't ask these questions in like rapid succession, but rather those are the questions that I have in my mind to guide really the journey that I am taking with this family, going back to a very volatile, traumatic, dangerous time and trying to understand what happened. And not like a detective to come up with facts necessarily, but rather to understand what the matrix of interactions between them um, were like around this big event. And I say journey because it is an empathic, it's like you have to, as a therapist, kind of really try to put yourself in your client's shoes. You have to imagine the fear and panic of a parent whose youth, whose child is threatening to jump out the window. You have to imagine what it's like to be a 15-year-old who is feeling so hopeless or helpless or angry and lost or confused that the only solution to that feeling of stuckness or problem is to jump out the window. And what a and then the experience of the younger sibling of watching all of this and how terrifying and confusing and upsetting that must be. So you as a therapist are taking all of that in and trying to really be able to understand and then articulate to each family member an understanding of what their experience might be in those moments. Um, okay. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Um, okay, so what I learn as I'm exploring the what happened just before, during, and after. So I learned that just before the threat by the older sibling to jump out of the window, that there's an argument in the home about the mother going to a thrift store to shop. And that this happens during dinner. And this argument um, stirs the aggravation that different family members feel around the hoarding issue. Um, the family is at the dinner table. They're talking about their days. Both of the youth went to school. The father went to work. The youngest asked the mother what she did during the day. And there is the way that the youngest asked the mom felt to the mom like the youngest was spying on her or tattletaling on her. Like, what did you do today? Um, and just in that little segment of interaction tells me about the arrangement of this family. So you have a youth talking to their parent, not up like this, talking up to an authority figure, almost talking down, or talking, um, acting like they would to another sibling, telling on them. Um, so another sort of micro moment that expressed how the mom's position in this family was not just ostracized, but clearly not in line with or at the level of dad's authority or hierarchy. Um, and so I can only imagine as a parent the feeling of your 13-year-old like treating you like another sibling, and tattletaling on you. Like how just um not just irritating, that's not the right word. It's like how infuriating that would feel. Um, and I could just imagine anger boiling up if I were mom, hearing that from my kid. Um, so it's important to just take note of that. Um, the mother responds to the youngest and says basically it's none of your business. Um, then the younger one starts to get frustrated and kind of condescending. Well, mom, you're not supposed to do that, which is basically what dad says. So she's picking this up from dad, and the youngest is in lockstep with the father, super enmeshed, super close, almost like his little assistant in a way, um, who he tells to spy on mom. Now, does he actually tell her to spy on mom? No, but these are the types of nonverbal implied communications that happen. Um, Let's see. Okay. The younger ones get the father then goes into this rant around mom buying unnecessary things is going to make us not be able to afford this apartment anymore. Where are we going to live? Under a bridge, he exclaims. Um, so this is a common refrain of his that um, mom's behavior of going places and buying things is going to cause this problem where the family is not going to be able to afford their rent any longer. And where are they going to go live? They're going to go live under a bridge. So for him, mom's behavior triggers a deep fear of insecurity, of financial insecurity, physical insecurity. So I take note of that. So, but the key is that the family is what they're expressing is anger. But I am getting to underneath what's underneath the anger is all this fear. And that's where the reframes are really useful. Um, and because when dad is saying, uh, where are we going to live? Under a bridge. He says that in an angry, accusatory way. But that dad, like that must be awful to imagine living under a bridge. I can't imagine. I mean, that would be terrifying. Um, so there is an in there with dad, and you don't have to like you can just assume that that fear and terror is there. And then you can confirm and say, I imagine that is terrifying. How often do you worry about losing your housing? And that's a way to then explore how the fear that drives the anger. Because if we don't explore the thing that's underneath and driving the anger, we'll never be able to help dissolve the anger, or help other family members recognize that, oh, when so and so is being angry, they're they're expressing a more primary emotion, sadness, fear, worry, but they're doing it in an ineffective way. And that's the kind of like awareness that we want to bring to families. Uh, so at this point, mom, after feeling berated by the youngest and dad, leaves the kitchen table, locks herself in the bedroom. There's a brief quiet. The kids and father finish dinner in silence. The kids go to their room, they're doing their homework, and then they hear mom and dad yelling. The oldest is overwhelmed, super sensitive, um, can understand and appreciate mom's position in the family of being kind of the scapegoat, and also holding their own feelings of resentment and hurt towards the mother. So this is a youth that can really see the complexity and nuance of relationships and feelings. Can both be angry by mom and feel sorry and feel some empathy and compassion for mom. Um, so according to youth, they tell me that they went into the living room and they start to yell to get their parents to stop arguing. Dad comes in the living room and then gets upset at the youth, telling the youth that you are going to disturb the neighbors. He doesn't say it in this nice language, but you're going to disturb the neighbors and we're going to get kicked out of our apartment to live under a bridge. So the same fear that gets activated by mom's hoarding gets activated by the youth's uh, yelling. Um, and so it's very clear that this dad is very tightly wound and worried that there is going to be something that creates a big concrete instability in the family's experience. And for him, this is the idea of this insecurity is a really life or death threat. Um, so the youth at this moment feels caught between a mother that is demeaned and berated, and then also by a father who is telling them that they shouldn't, in essence, they're telling them that they shouldn't feel what they're feeling. The youth is overwhelmed and screaming because they are having all these feelings of worry and not wanting their parents to fight, and it's really uncomfortable and not knowing how to get it to stop. So they have an outburst, and that's the thing that pulls dad away from mom. And so it's effective-ish in the sense that it gets the parents to stop arguing in that moment. Um, but what it does, it just fuels the fire of another conflict between her and dad. Um, so it's important to understand and get in the mind of this youth. They feel trapped, right? And the only way out is through the window. Um, the youth feels completely unseen, unheard, and the only way to get noticed is to do something dramatic and dangerous. Um, and this escalation in behavior and then escalation and conflict between family members is what then leads to the outside providers or helpers getting involved. Um, uh, my understanding was that then at some point the police were called, things calmed down. After the police came, they arrived, and the immediate emergency seemed to be averted. Um, and there was a return to what we call homeostasis, which is when the normal familiar patterns of a family take hold and the family becomes more comfortable. And that's what all systems do when things get too intense or too out of whack. There's this uh, flight back to a place that feels more comfortable. Um, and so the family is able to kind of go back to um, instead of mom and dad yelling at each other, mom gets scared. Dad actually provides some comfort. The older youth says that they didn't mean they weren't going to jump out the window. Um, and so it's a kind of minimizing of what just happened. The youngest starts to lighten the mood by telling jokes. So this is how the family returns to kind of its normal, stable state. But in the return, none of the underlying feelings of fear and none of that gets addressed or feeling misunderstood, feeling uh, devalued, feeling unseen. None of that gets discussed or, um, yeah, or talked about at all. It all just kind of gets swept under the rug. Um, so, um, and we see that in highly symptomatic families. There'll be a flare up where there'll be like a threat to suicide or something like that. And then that will sometimes get the family to go back to um, what is their more typical way of functioning. Okay. Uh, now, um, my job, the therapist's job, is to see how this family goes back to this condition of homeostasis, but still maintains those patterns that I discussed earlier about how they are organized. So the dad is still kind of up here as the only executive. The oldest youth is still caught in between the parents. Um, and this arrangement, how is it connected to the symptomatic behavior, the quote unquote presenting problem? Um, so a youth that feels, so I would turn to parents and say to them, and I said to them, after learning multiple sessions, learning about this pattern, learning about the ways that the youth felt caught between the parents. Um, I said that given how they feel, um, it's no wonder that um, they are not developing in the way that you are hoping. Um, Even though you are not, it's the last thing in the world you would ever want your child to die or to kill themselves, for sure. Um, but there is this way in which, um, when the two of you argue, your kid feels like they need to come and protect mom from dad. And then feels like when they try to share how that position feels untenable and too much to carry, that they'd rather just jump out the window. Um, I would like to help the two of you parents help remove your child from that position, because that position of needing to monitor the space between the two of you will get in the way of their development, and will at times make her feel so confused and scared that the only solution feels uh, like death. And I know that's the last thing that you want. How can we uh, fire her from that position? Um, and I look to the youth and I say, is that's like, because I want to make sure that the youth connects to that idea and reaffirms that feeling of feeling caught between. Um, and how just awful it feels. So I've also asked them, like, can you share with your parents what does that feel like when um, your parents are feeling, or when your parents are arguing, or when your mom leaves the table and shuts and goes into her room and shuts the door, slams the door. Like, what goes on for you? And then the being able to connect what the kid describes as their experience, um, to then the like, okay, in order to help connecting those feelings to then the behavior of the suicidal action or gesture. Um, and then, okay, how can parents, you guys help your children deal with difficult feelings that they're having? Um, because the idea of jumping out the window is a horrible idea. And your kid is much smarter, much more creative than that. Um, but you guys need to help them um, be able to help themselves when they're in that space where it feels like there's no other option. And by the way, I should have said I'm using the they, them pronoun. So this particular youth, about 5 years into our work together, came out as non-binary. yeah, that was a whole other part of this family's development. Um, where am I? Um, um, so I have in mind now that I'm seeing this, the structure, the way that I see it, the structure that I would like to create looks more like a clear parental executive subsystem on the top and a sibling subsystem underneath. Um, I provide a reframe to the family around how I observe their arrangement and how, despite how much the parents care and love their children, they do. And, and in many ways, and in many examples I've learned over time around how nurturing these parents are, despite these other ways in which they hurt their kids. Um, that despite this love, you have unwittingly recruited your children to take sides when you guys fight. And when you get caught up, and when they get caught up and worried about the two of you, it's too overwhelming. And there are times that the oldest feels like you don't hear how it makes them feel, and they have to do something drastic to get you to understand or even hear them. And I don't think that you are doing this on purpose, but you guys get ensnared in a dynamic. Um, it's like getting caught in a big fishing net and then trying to get untangled. Um, and by the way, I brought up this analogy of the fishing net and the hooks and the getting untangled, and because Dad comes from a military family where there was he grew up doing a lot of boating and fishing, and it's very much a part of his childhood, and so I knew that that analogy would kind of connect with him. Um, And so I say, I would like to help you help your children be 13 and 15 years old and worry about high school and all the nutty things that youth these days have to worry about, instead of getting caught up in this tangle of fishing lines and hooks and feel like the only way out is to kill themselves. Um, so that is the basic framework, reframe that I am beginning to establish that kind of grounds us for the next number of years. Um, I I would keep coming back to this analogy of getting caught in the fishing hook thing. Um, the family would at times be amenable to my efforts at restructuring, but sometimes they would repeat old patterns of interacting. And this is part of the therapeutic process. People change a little bit and then kind of revert back. So some of the restructuring moves that I tried, I met with the parents together as a unit, working on their couple's relationship. Um, but I framed it as a meeting with the two of you so that two of you can minimize the leakage of your conflict out into the family living room so that your kids don't need to feel responsible for trying to help you guys. Um, I sometimes even had individual meetings with each parent. Um, with the dad, I tried to join with his fear and help him see that this tight grip that he had on his wife's actions contributed to the very concerns and problems for which he was frustrated, namely the hoarding, um, and drinking. which also emerged over time. Um, and as I say the word time, I'm looking at the time and see that I want to give 15 minutes at the end to, so let's see here. Um, let me, yeah, I'm going to finish this for 5 minutes. Um, I can go over by about 5 minutes. So hopefully we can still have 15 minutes of questions, but if not, then we can carry some of those questions into next week. Um, and already drinking. Okay. Um, so I would say things to him like, uh, when you are worried, when you get triggered by and worried that the family is going to lose the home, you become demeaning and disrespectful towards your wife, and sometimes in front of the kids. And in response to that, she gets younger, and almost like an adolescent, she starts rebelling. And in her rebelling, she does the very things that you don't like. She leaves the home. She goes to the thrift store. Does things in secret, like drinking. So, in a weird way, your fear and anxiety makes you treat her in a way that pushes her to do the very things you don't like. And also, when she's hurt emotionally, she drinks to soothe the hurt. And when she hoards, she's building a fortress to protect herself from your ridicule and scorn. And I say these things, I like, does this check for you, Mom? When, and she'll say, yes, I don't like when it feels very demeaning the way he talks to me. So I'm saying these things because I already know that that's how they feel. But I'm putting it in relational language. Uh, I wasn't super successful over time creating a great boundary around their subsystem, frankly. Um, I worked at it tirelessly and kept coming back to it, but the two of them were very rigid. Mom had an incredibly traumatic childhood and also was impacted by neurodivergence. So this kind of gets back to this question of when a problem is individual versus systemic. Um, she had a lot of challenges, in personal challenges that got in the way of her functioning in a way that would have made the parent relationship more egalitarian, more equal. Um, but I was still able to help the family despite this. Um, in part because the goal was really to help these kids grow up and to help these parents kind of get out of the way and allow these kids to grow up. Um, uh, I turned to the youth when I realized that I wasn't going to get very far with the parents. And I tried to help the youth, the siblings, foster a better connection and relationship between the two of them. I had sibling sessions where I just met with the two of them. And over time, I helped them to appreciate each other more. Um, and today, it's been 10 years now. I see the oldest for individual therapy many years later. Um, and the siblings live together. They are very connected. And spoiler alert, the youngest child who was super enmeshed with dad had to break that connection in order to start growing up. And is now doing one of those things that it's very popular these days called no contact. And so the youngest is trying to figure out a way to um individuate and become more autonomous. But fortunately, they're doing it with the help of their older sibling, who, by the way, also went no contact for a little bit, but then has since reconciled with the parents and is able to see the parents in all their complexity, both the ways that the parents harmed them and ways that the parents were nurturing. Really an example of how to hold both and thinking. Uh, So, how did I promote this new organization? I encourage the siblings to spend time together. They each have unique and different strengths, and I encourage each of them to learn from the other and for them to do things outside of the home with each other without the parents. The youth over time became more complex and more interesting and more flexible. Unfortunately, the parents in some ways became more rigid. But the kids are doing able to they were able to become more thriving, more independent, and growing up now in their 20s. Um, okay. I spoke a lot today. Wow. Okay. I'm gonna turn to my mouth is dry. Turn to questions. Um, yes, and then so please fire away if there are questions.
Is it okay to ask with voice? Yeah.
Is it okay to ask what? I'm sorry?
Oh, with voice now. It's okay
Yes,
to
yes, yes, please.
thanks. Thanks. Thank you for this case. It's very impressive. And thanks for your job with this family. And it's quite emotional. But I wanted to ask you, how do you think these parents seem like they are borderline? I mean, their psyche or
Ah,
level. Thanks.
um, I see them as uh I don't like to put labels like borderline because then it can limit what people's potential range is. I saw them as people still caught up in their childhood and early developmental traumas, and in some ways still doing the best that they could given the circumstances that they came from, trying to um, give their kids something slightly different than they had, and they actually there are a lot of lovely things that they were able to provide for their kids. Um, and I perhaps didn't spend enough time sort of describing those aspects of the family. I wish I had done more of that. But yeah, so to me, it's almost doesn't matter. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Скажіть, будь ласка, коли ви говорили про те, що дівчата почали практикувати неоконтакт, можливо, просто в мене трошки інше розуміння, що ви мали на увазі? Тобто вони почали уникати спілкування, бо в моєму розумінні це те, що веде потім до соціальної тривожності, вплоть до такої психогенної аутизації. А ви розповідали про це як про ну, щось таке гарне для дітей, тому я хотіла прояснити.
Did I lose interpretation? Because I did. Sorry. Now it's back on. I think I had turned off the English translation.
Я хотіла зрозуміти, що ви мали на увазі, коли говорили, що дівчата почали практикувати неоконтакт.
Я думаю, там не нео, а no contact. Я думаю,
Ah,
там ще без контакту.
Ну, тобто це уникання контакту і ізоляція, да? Тому
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's I don't know how common it is across the world, but certainly in the United States, there is a something called like a where children, sometimes adult children, um, they cut off contact with their parents. They don't talk to them. They don't engage, interact. And it's like going dark or going silent. And sometimes that becomes encouraged by the larger cultural norms, like other youth are doing that. So they get kind of reinforced by other kids to, it's the thing to do because your parents are abusive or toxic, and therefore, um, in order to be healthy or preserve yourself, you need to have a complete boundary between you and them. So that's what the no contact means. So each of these kids did that essentially for a period of time, but didn't stay in that place, which is good because that's not a healthy place to stay, I think, for the vast majority of situations. Every once in a while, it probably is appropriate, but not the majority.
дякую.
Other questions? Yes, somebody is holding their hand up.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the great lecture. I have a question which doesn't connect to your case,
Mm-hmm.
but yes, like I got it when you explained about your case.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, the child with autism and mutism is almost always present during conversation with the mother. Even though the child does not speak at all, the child speaks just with the family members, I assume that she understands much more than she expresses.
Mm-hmm.
Are there some, I don't know, structural or clinical guidelines how to speak with the parents in the child's presence without ignoring the child, but also without increasing pressure or anxiety?
Yeah. So I would talk to the parents probably without the kid to kind of get their thinking about what the kid understands and doesn't understand, um, and how they think the kid experiences the sessions. Um, And then I would, in the parts of the session where the kid is there, um, I would always speak in language that would make sense for the kid's developmental age. Um, so I wouldn't, um, yeah, I would, if I felt like I wanted to talk about something that it didn't make sense for the kid to be a part of, I would then arrange for a separate meeting with the parents without the kid.
Yeah, just a small comment. The
Mm.
problem is that in this case, the child stays always next to the mother. She follows her, the
Ah,
daughter, everywhere. So it
yeah.
doesn't work at all. Even like some, I don't know, conversations at school with some organization and so on. So it doesn't work without a kid.
How
That's
old
the
is the kid?
problem.
How old is the
Uh,
kid?
14 years old.
And the kid literally is essentially attached to the parent.
Yes,
And the
yes, to the
parent
mother, to the
attached,
mother.
and the mother
Yes.
can't go anywhere without the kid.
No, no, at all.
Ah, okay. Um, so to me, that is kind of the problem, is that what keeps them so connected and locked together? And can there be ways to, like, to me, I would want to see how mom maybe thinks that undermines the kid's development. And if mom can agree to that or see that in some ways, that both it doesn't help the kid's development and it's an impossible thing to be a parent literally 24/7 all the time for that many years. It's one thing to do it for an infant, but to do it for a 14-year-old is that's impossible. And that's just not it's not good for either of them. So for mom, she's gonna but here's the thing, they need a third or somebody outside to help them be able to separate. Um, so yeah, it's more it's not really about what to say or not to say in front of the kid because the kid's going to be there. So all this stuff has to be said in front of the kid because there's no other option. Um, and there are you have to um, find out what are there any exceptions? So the mom has to go to school with the kid?
Yes, yes. So she's there as well. So some
Wow.
exceptions just at home.
Mhm.
The child is in her room and the mother can be somewhere in the apartment.
Ah,
Even
okay.
even talk to me, even talk to me in the kitchen.
Ah,
Yes. So at
great.
home
Okay.
it works.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, perfect. So there's something that happens, something in the home where there's a safety in a way that daughter doesn't have to look after mom. And that's
Okay.
how I'm thinking of it. Daughter looks after mom in a weird way.
Hmm.
So there's something that daughter feels okay enough to let mom out of her sight. She feels okay enough in her own skin. She feels safe enough, whatever. Uh, um, yeah, so daughter's not going to acknowledge this and might not even be able to acknowledge this, but there's something interesting about if they're outside of the home, close to mom, in the home, doesn't need to be right there with her. So I'd be curious about mom's any trauma history, anything that the daughter witnessed that happened to mom, things like that. And then I would maybe provide a frame around daughter protecting mom and how can mom help daughter fire daughter from that job of being worried about mom, which keeps her connected like that. So
Yeah, that's very interesting. So thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Thanks.
All right, let's do one more if there is one more. And then we'll break for the day, and you can add others to the list that I will look at next week. Okay, I don't think I see any hands or questions. Correct? Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. And I'll see you next week.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
До побачення.